with an invocation.
Good evening. Welcome to St. Thomas Presbyterian Church. My name is Jonathan Britt. I'm the associate pastor here. I want to, on behalf of myself and our senior pastor, Reverend Dr. Nora Fitch, who could not be here this evening. She had another family event that she had to be at tonight, but she wants to welcome you as well. Also, I want to thank Sarah and Jim and Erica and Bailey for being here tonight. Thank you guys for taking time out of your week to come and to help educate us on this topic. With that, I'm going to open us with prayer. Will you pray with me, please? Holy God, we thank you for tonight, for the ability to come, to listen and to hear and to hopefully be stirred to action by one of the particularly egregious sins of our community and our world. We are thankful for the work of United Against Human Trafficking, the Houston Police Department, A Second Cup, and The Landing, for the work that they do here and in each of their communities. We also pray tonight for current victims of trafficking in Houston, in Texas, and throughout the world, that they be able to find peace in some way this evening. And we give prayers as well for former victims, for those who are still working through the trauma that they have witnessed. God, we ask that you find us tonight open and more aware of how we may be able to be your hands and feet in this world. Amen.
Okay, everyone should have one of our handouts. If you don't have one, raise your hand and someone will bring you one. I'm not going to read all that to you. You know how to read, and I don't want to take up any more time. Each of our speakers will have 17 minutes, and I will hold up a little card to give them a warning, and then we'll get the hook to pull them off stage. Our first speaker is Sarah Karansky with United Against Houston Trafficking.
Hello. If I stand off to the side, can everyone hear me? I'll use the mic. No, I've got a lot of head shakes. Never mind. Oh, there's a... let's see. Can everyone note? Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm a pacer, so I don't like being stuck behind a podium. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Karansky, and I serve as the education specialist at an organization called United Against Human Trafficking. And really what I'm going to be talking to you about today is what is human trafficking, right? We're going to start at the beginning, really trying to break down these misconceptions, what we're seeing, how it manifests, things like that. And I know I have a short amount of time, so it might be a lot of information, but bear with me. But I do want to start off with a quick video. Yep. In just 1 second. Well, before we do that, while that's happening, I'll just keep talking. So I'll introduce my organization. So I work for United Against Human Trafficking, which is a nonprofit organization in the greater Houston area. And so when I refer to Houston, I do mean that greater Houston area. And I'll be completely honest, guys, I have only lived here about 7 months now, so I'm not entirely sure where the borders of that area are. I haven't found them yet. It's a very large area. It's a very large community. But that is what I'm referring to when I say Houston. It's this greater Houston area, Harris County and several surrounding. And so we work in Houston, and we work to combat human trafficking, right? Just as our name would suggest. And we do this through 3 different avenues. The first of which is education. So as the education specialist, that's my primary role, and I facilitate frontline professional trainings. So these are trainings for those who are considered important stakeholders in this fight, right? So I facilitate trainings for law enforcement officers, for healthcare professionals, educators, the hospitality industry, many, many other groups. And really the purpose of this is these individuals, these professions have the best opportunity to identify victims of human trafficking. So how can I work with them to help better equip them, right, to identify victims? And we'll talk about why that's so important in just a second. The second avenue that my organization takes is through awareness. And so that's actually what I'm doing here with you all tonight. trying to raise awareness levels of human trafficking. Show of hands, has anyone here seen the movie Taken? Right? With Liam Neeson? So this is the way that human trafficking is depicted in this movie is how it's depicted in a lot of media sources, right? It's in the movies, TV shows, everywhere. And this is what people think human trafficking really is. And so for those who haven't seen it, this movie depicts a young girl halfway across the world being violently and dramatically kidnapped and physically chained to a bed. However, human trafficking is much more subtle, and so raising awareness levels starts there. What is it really? How does it really manifest, especially in our communities? The last avenue that UAHT takes is through outreach. So we have an incredible outreach team who work in homeless shelters and at day labor sites and are out on the streets, again, just talking to people, right? Trying to engage with them, start these conversations. What are their rights, right? What is human trafficking? What are their resources available to them? Because you're gonna hear quite a bit tonight from the anti-trafficking network in place in Houston, and it's an incredible network full of very unique and amazing, intelligent, passionate organizations and individuals working to provide resources, services, programs, whatever we can. And you're gonna hear from major players in this tonight, so you guys got lucky. But that's something that our outreach team does, is how do we start connecting community members with this network? Do we have the video? Okay, and so now we're gonna show the video. I show this video in all of my presentations, at the start of all of my presentations and all of my trainings. And so I have seen it countless times. And still, every time that that woman says, no one ever does, I get goosebumps. Because that's really what we're fighting. One of the greatest barriers to combating human trafficking is that victims are remaining unidentified. We're not seeing them. They're hidden in plain sight, right? We hear these different phrases connected to human trafficking all the time, but it's because they're true. And so you all just being here tonight, coming in, taking your own time to learn about human trafficking, to learn about the network and the resources available in Houston, means that you're officially a part of this anti-trafficking network, right? Leaving here tonight, you're not only gonna know what is human trafficking, what are these misconceptions, what are the red flags you should be looking out for, but who can you call? Who can you connect with? What's available to you should you ever suspect that you've identified a victim? And that officially means you are a part of this network. And it's an incredible role that you get to be a part of. And it's something that we're all very grateful for, knowing that we have people to support us in this fight. We have people who are keeping their eye out, right? Who aren't going to ignore it anymore. So what is human trafficking, right? So I've just given you this big job, right? You're officially a part of this network. You're going to be helping us fight it and identify it, just being aware of it. So what is it now? Human trafficking, at its core, is a human rights violation. And that's really important to remember, because right now it's a buzzword, right? It gets referenced a lot when people talk about immigration and border security. And people like to talk about human trafficking as a public health issue and as a criminal justice issue and any other number of nexuses, right? And they're all correct. Right? There's a reason that it's a buzzword right now, because it has so many connections. But at its core, something I always like to point out is that it is a human rights violation. And it is a human rights violation that is happening every day in our city, in our state, in our country, in every country around the world. So that's just kind of bringing it back home to the importance, right? Human trafficking is market-driven, right? So if we go back to basic econ, it's market-driven, which means it's a supply and demand. It is demand-driven. It is driven by a demand for purchasing sex and for purchasing free or cheap labor. If that demand didn't exist, many people believe that human trafficking wouldn't, because it's demand-driven. Human trafficking is the control and the use and the manipulation of a human being through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of either labor exploitation or sexual exploitation. And I know that's a mouthful. So I really want to break that down for you just a little bit. That force, fraud, and coercion, those elements are really what make every human trafficking situation unique, right? There's no such thing as a textbook case because they're all different. The experiences of these survivors are all unique. They're all different. But that force, fraud, and coercion, those force, fraud, and coercion elements are really what tends to drive that a little more. So force is that taken mentality. If we think back to the movie, right? It's a physical force of control, a physical means of control. Fraud is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a lie, a false promise. We can see this as either a false job offer or a fake relationship, right? Anything like that, it's a lie. Coercion, again, kind of what it sounds like. We can see this manifest as blackmail, maybe. We'll see coercion manifest as threats against the victim or their families, remembering what a person would do to protect their loved ones. We'll also see coercion through the taking of IDs, right? So traffickers will take their victims' identification documents, driver's license, passports, visas, and they're able to create control that way. So it's the control, use, and manipulation of a human being through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of either sexual exploitation or labor exploitation. That's the basic, right, legal definition kind of broken down. It's a little longer, but that's kind of just broken down. But what we're actually finding, or how do I want to word this? There's a lot of misconceptions, right? There's a lot of stereotypes about human trafficking, and not just thinking about the movies and how we see it in TV. A lot of people, number one, don't talk about labor trafficking, right? We hear a lot more about sex trafficking. And there's a few reasons for that, right? One of which is sex sells, right? It's a little more interesting. It's also easier to identify. And I use that relatively because human trafficking is not easy to identify in any means. But labor laws are nuanced, right? They change based on a person's age or profession or state that you're in. So it's much harder to identify labor trafficking, labor exploitation. Another misconception that I always like to address is that human trafficking happens overnight. I get a lot of questions about people being kidnapped, right? It's, maybe someone was talking to a stranger online, they meet them at the mall, and then they're immediately kidnapped. Happened overnight, it happened very quickly. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing, right? So it takes time. Traffickers are in this for the long con. It's a psychological game that they're playing, and they're good at it. They're good at identifying vulnerabilities in a person. They're good at identifying these vulnerabilities that they can then exploit. Because everyone has vulnerabilities, right? We're all vulnerable to something. But traffickers are really good at finding and identifying those voids that they can fill, right? Those gaps in people's lives. Whatever it is that they might be vulnerable to, they can find that and exploit that. So trafficking doesn't happen overnight. We also get a lot of misconceptions about it not really happening here, right? I do these presentations a lot. This is my primary role. I stand up in front of people and talk about human trafficking. This is my job. And I get a lot of still disconnect. I go on and on about how important it is and how to identify, and people will still disconnect the problem. Okay, yeah, we know it exists, but that's over there. Or it's happening in that neighborhood, in that area of Houston. But breaking down that misconception now, that is a misconception. We've seen it everywhere. There isn't any specific type of place that makes it more susceptible. We've seen human trafficking cases in nice, affluent, gated communities in Katy, right? The last place you'd ever expect it to happen. So just remembering that it does happen here. It happens in this area, it happens in that area, it happens over there and over here. So trying to break that down. We want to make sure that we're not disconnecting still. Another misconception that people will ask me about is, what's another good one? Red flags, right? We talk about red flags a lot. What are these indicators? And there's quite a few of them. If anyone wants to come talk to me after, I have some materials, the tabling in the other room, I'm not sure what that room was called, that has a whole list of red flags. But people will read this and they'll say, oh, well, these are all of them, right? And people will talk about things like, well, I mentioned earlier, taking of IDs, or, goodness, I wish I had a list in front of me because now I can't think of any. They'll look at, wow, my mind just blanked. I'll come back to that. I'm sorry, guys. So they'll look at these red flags and they think it's a checklist, right? They'll think it's a list. Things like security, there we go. Things like security, that's always a red flag, right? Security meant to keep a person in rather than out. They look at younger people, change in academic performance or signs of physical abuse. If someone doesn't have control over their movements, if someone doesn't have a choice in where they live or where they go places or when they go places, things like that. If people are accompanied by a buddy, right? That buddy who controls the conversation, who answers all the questions, maybe they're translating for them. These are all red flags, but people will see these and we get a lot of questions. We're like, okay, well, it's not on this list. Just know that, like I said before, there's no such thing as a specific or as a textbook human trafficking case. So these red flags are going to be different. They're important to know. I think I would really encourage everyone to come grab these lists because I think they are important to recognize. These are the things that make us take a step back and say, what's going on here? But it's not a definitive list. And then the last misconception I always want to talk about are numbers, right? Statistics are important. Figures and knowing how many people are really being victimized, how many traffickers are there. This is important, right? It kind of drives the point home. But human trafficking exists in a clandestine world. It's not meant to be seen, just like that video showed us. We don't have exact numbers. We have estimates. We have ideas. We have a lot of people working on research to try and figure out how do we quantify a crime that we can't see. And so these numbers are coming from very sound sources and very sound methodologies, but they're not definitive. So one such estimate says that it was published by the International Labor Organization, right, looking at human trafficking on a global scale, estimated that there are 24.9 million victims of human trafficking in the world. Some people believe these estimates are low. Some people believe they're high. As you continue your own education, that's really going to be up to you to decide, right? It's going to be up to you to decide, is it low? Is it high? Of this estimate, 24.9 million around the world, this same report reported that 55% of these victims are female and 45% are male. So not just looking at the numbers right there, but that misconception right there, victims are only female. That's pretty close to even, isn't it? 55% female, 45% male. It's not necessarily how we're identifying them, but it's the belief that that's who the victims are. This same report also estimated that 74% are adults and 26% are children. It's breaking that down, right? Those stereotypes we don't even realize we're holding. It's not just young girls. It's men and it's women, it's adults and it's children. Traffickers don't care about a victim's gender or age or socioeconomic background or immigration status, right? If a trafficker, just like I said at the beginning, can identify a vulnerability in a person, then that's what they're going to do. So really what I want you to take away from tonight is not only are you entering this network, right? You're officially just coming here, starting this process and learning more about human trafficking in Houston. You're officially a part of this network. You're with us now. You have a role in this, and it's a really important role. You're going to hear from law enforcement and from some service providers next, and you'll hear about their roles, right? The services that they provide, the investigations. And that's such an important role too. But don't discount yours, your responsibility in this fight. We're no longer keeping our eyes shut, right? We're going to keep our eyes open to this. We're going to look for it. We're going to ask questions. And should we ever suspect someone is being trafficked or something just doesn't feel right, and for some reason you're remembering this forum, you're remembering these presentations, you're going to say something. You'll hear it over and over. See something, say something. But that's officially your own role now, and it is such an important one. And so I'm going to end now by just saying thank you so much for coming out tonight and listening to me spiel at you. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, thank you so much for entering this anti-trafficking network.
I really encourage you all to read the bios. These are some very qualified, very well-educated and experienced people. Our next speaker is James Bradley Dale, commander of the Vice Division of the Houston Police Department.
Thank you. You turned it on? Oh, okay. Okay. Let's see if we get. Oh, here we go. All right. Thank you very much. As she stated, I'm Commander Jim Dale. I'm currently assigned to the Vice Division of the Houston Police Department. I got two supporters in the back there. The top row